Hello everyone and welcome to this first session of Communication and Presentation Skills. First, let me introduce you to this course. This course is meant for all the Bachelors of Journalism and Mass Communication students who are either preparing for their internships or planning to go out for their jobs. Next, I'd like to tell you about the mode of this course. This course is going to be completely online, which means that my maximum part of the teaching learning transactions would be either through audio programs or video programs, video lectures, discussion forums, blogs and emails. Third, we will not be covering the greater details of communication principles, communication models, theories and concepts because I understand that this has either been covered in your course or you are in the process of covering this in your communication theory paper. Nevertheless, to build in some context and to build some background, we'll be touching upon the basic concepts briefly. And we will be focusing largely on professional communication development skills because that is what you need when you go out into the professional corporate world. So let us begin with the first thing. What is communication? Communication, as you all know, is a cyclic process that involves the sharing of experiences between two or more participants. What are the functions of communication? Communication helps in building up relationships. It is a mode of self-expression. Communication makes culture, and culture makes communication possible. As you all know, culture is the cumulative sum of experiences of a society. Next, communication also helps in transferring data, information and knowledge from one relationship to another, while it also builds relations. Also, communication helps in forming personality. The kind of communication one receives from the society decides whether one ends up being a pro-social personality or an anti-social personality. Now let us come over to the process of communication. As you can see here in this model, this is a cyclic model of communication whereby you have a sender and a receiver. The message is getting transferred by means of a channel which may either be a language, some mass media, gestures and body postures, etc. So the sender encodes a message which gets transferred through a channel to the receiver. The receiver decodes the message, interprets or makes meaning out of it and then encodes the feedback. This feedback is then carried as a message through the same channel to the sender. While this is done, the receiver becomes the sender and the sender becomes the receiver. So this is the communication process. Now let us discuss the types of communication. There are four main types of communication. One is the intrapersonal, interpersonal, group and mass communication. When we talk about the intrapersonal communication, we know it is auto communication, whereby the process of contemplating, formulating and conceptualizing is involved in communication within a person's mind before any overt communication is made. This is also known as auto communication, which involves rehearsing with oneself. When we talk about the interpersonal communication, we mean that the feedback is immediate. Besides the words, you can also see the gestures, body postures of a person, and then the communication also involves immediate feedback. Coming over to the group communication, this is largely an extension of interpersonal communication, which may take place between a few people. And there is always a chance of this group communication being either formal and informal, with a chance of a leader emerging in it. In interpersonal communication, you are able to influence a person better because there is greater motivation, emotional connect involved. So also is the case with group communication. And a group always is motivated to work towards a common interest or goal. Talking about mass communication, you all know mass communication is the communication that takes place with the help of a mechanical device and it happens simultaneously to heterogeneous audience. So now there are two things involved in this. One is the audience characteristic and the second is feedback characteristic. The audience characteristic includes that the audience are heterogeneous and geographically away from each other in time and space, and the communication is taking place with a large number of audience simultaneously. As compared to this, feedback is slow, weak, not instantaneous, and a costly affair. Say for example the TRP ratings or the circulation numbers of newspapers. So this is about the various types of communication. Let us now come over to the barriers of communication. When we talk about the barriers, there are three major kinds of barriers. Focus on this. Barriers are of three types. One is the technical, the language, and the psychological barriers. Let us try and understand what each of them stands for. The technical barriers can be timing, distortion, information overload, and cultural differences. So while the timing of receiving communication is not appropriate, timing can be a technical barrier to communication. When we talk about distortion, distortion is any kind of noise that may enter the message and distort its original form. There are times where a lot of information is given to the audience which results into information overload and your message may not be well received. Also, there are a number of things that are considered positive in one culture and negative in another. So cultural differences between people can also act as a technical barrier of communication. Talking about the language barriers, there are two basic kinds of barriers. One is vocabulary, which means use of words which are not easily understandable or comprehensive by people at large. And the second is semantics. The word semantic means meaning. So whenever the meaning of a message is lost, obviously language barrier can become a major barrier of communication. Talking about the psychological barriers, information filtering. There are a few things that audience may not be interested in, and hence they may filter out that information. This is known as information filtering, which can be a psychological barrier. Also, lack of trust and openness and jealousy can be other factors which can psychologically affect the smooth transaction of communication process. Preoccupation, whenever the audience is occupied with something more important other than your message, it results in preoccupation. Hearing. This is something that you will also understand by means of an audio clip, the difference between hearing and listening, and how hearing is a convenient way of giving away the message. Perception set differences. Every individual is brought up in a certain kind of environment, certain kind of culture, whereby certain values are acceptable to him or her and other values are not. This also results in the formation of perception and attitudes. Such kind of set perceptions is called as perception set, which is not easily changed and is dependent upon the culture and society and bringing up of an individual. This can act as a psychological barrier because any kind of communication that is not in connivance with the perception set of an individual can result into becoming a barrier. Noise, as we all know, is also a barrier and psychological barrier because noise can be when the mind is preoccupied with some other kind of information and while the message is being transferred. So noise can be a psychological barrier of communication.